Ladies and gentlemen, we're about to begin the funeral service. We ask for those that have a cell phone or pager, if you could turn it to the silent mode. Officiating is Rabbi Yochanan Posner.
Mizmor LeDavid, Adonai Roi lo yachzor. B'nois deshe yarbitzeini, al mei menuchos yinahaleni. Nafshi yeshoivev yancheni, maglit tzedek leman shemoi. Gam ki elech begeit salmaves lo ira ra ki ato imadi. Shiftecha mishantecha heima yinachamuni. Taroich lefanai shulcha neged soiroi. Deshanta Vashemen Roishi Koi Sirevaya Ach Toiva Chesed Yudefuni Kol Yemei Chayoi Veshafti Besadinoi La'oirech Yamim. We've gathered today to celebrate the life of Harriet Lavenda, Chaya Rivka Bas Yaakov Aaron. Because today is Hanukkah and it's a celebratory day, so we're not going to have an official hesped, but we're going to share a few words about Harriet's amazing life and what we could learn from her to enhance and improve our lives. So Harriet was born to her parents, Jacob and Evelyn Zukowsky, in the Bronx in 1928. That was a long time ago. It was right around the time of the Great Depression, and it was a very, unique point in history. She was close to both sets of grandparents, and the grandparents shared their grandchildren equally, one Seder at each set of grandparents. She had a very Jewish upbringing, going to Yiddish school as a kid, and so on. Eventually, when she was a teenager, they moved from the Bronx to Hartford, Connecticut, and that's where she made her lifelong friends. In general, when somebody has literally lifelong friends, that means that they're special people. Not everyone manages to do that. She had her hobbies, she played the mandolin, and in general, they did their best to have happy, healthy, normal childhood and young times, even though it was a very tough time in the world. Eventually, she met her first husband, Sid, and they began their family in Hartford in 1950. He passed away only 8 years later, and took only 3 years. In 1961, she met Dr. Nathan Lavenda. I called him Dr. Lavenda, but Harriet called him Nat. She met Nat, and they really created a beautiful family together. I remember when I was here doing Dr. Lavenda's funeral, and it was very important to Harriet that we emphasize that they created one unified single family together. They moved here and there. Eventually, they moved to Ashkelon. Okay, but before that, how'd they meet? This doesn't happen anymore today. They met at a post-Yom Kippur dance, and she told Nat that if they get married, they're going to have a kosher home. And they did have a kosher home, even though many times it wasn't easy. So when they lived in Oshkosh, it meant driving 75 miles, and the cars didn't have GPS in those days. It meant just to buy kosher meat, which then had to be brought home and salted, and as a whole production in and of itself. It wasn't easy to be a young family living not necessarily in a built-up Jewish community and keeping these things so carefully. But they did it because Judaism, and particularly kosher, was very important to Harriet. And in general, in their lives together, besides for raising their own children, they also raised the people around them. So today we know, oh yeah, sure, send my kid to college campus, they'll go to Chabad, or they'll go here or there. In those days, it was go to the Lavendas, because they made Seder for the college students, They tried to start to make a minyan, although that didn't quite happen, but they put the effort into making a minyan. They were in touch with the Twerskis about how to do things in just the right way. And wherever they went, they made a Kiddush Hashem. So, for example, Steve was a Cub Scout, and the Cub Scouts had a potluck dinner. Everybody would bring their own food to share. So Harriet brought kosher mac and beef, and her kids only ate that mac and beef. So they took part in the community, but they did it in a very careful, kosher, Jewish observant way. They came to the Chicago area in 1969. They lived in Niles, and there too, they were involved hosting Hanukkah celebrations, and there is the well-known episode of the time when Harriet baked a beautiful, beautiful, beautiful cake for the Hanukkah party with blue and white icing. It was perfect until you took a bite. I'm not going to say many more about that. Use your imagination. But the reason I'm mentioning this story is because it shows Harriet's beautiful personality. That story is known and remembered. You know why? Because Harriet told it and retold it. Because she laughed. She had a sense of humor. So the cake flopped. So what? It was still a good party. It's not about the cake. It's about the people who came together and celebrated Hanukkah. And I think that's a really important thing to know, especially now when the world is so messed up. We have to remember what's important and focus on that. And also, speaking of things that are happening now, you may have noticed it's frigid outside. And Harriet was somebody who took her kids to Hebrew school in the freezing, snowy cold. And I want to also remember, in those days, if it was cold, did the car start? Maybe half the time, probably, right? And she did it, and she drove in the snow. And so it's also, I guess, a reminder to us about what's important. Eventually, living in this area in Niles, and then they were able to have their kids in Hillel Torah and at a Crown, and that is where Harriet began her career as a Hillel Torah lunch lady. And in general, wherever she was, she always encouraged her family, the people around her, to grow in Yiddishkeit as teens, to take part in NCSY. She hosted in the home Shabbatons and meetings, and she encouraged social interaction between the Jewish kids. And then also there were the things that, well, you had to be there to appreciate it. Like, for some reason, no one really knows why, but Dr. Lavenda and Harriet took their kids camping. Now, that I understand. The thing is, Dr. Lavenda could not assemble a tent for the life of him. So that created a very amazing situation where they were going around like collecting helpers, the whole campsite, all to help this very smart, intellectual, wonderful man assemble a tent for his kids. And Harriet, stay-at-home mom, when the kids were grown, then she worked on her education, she took a job, and so on. She actually completed a degree just for fun, not for the job, just for the idea, because I think to her it was important to be educated. And I think you see it in her kids. They just know things. Why? Because knowing things is an important value for Harriet. Harriet was a lifelong member of Hadassah. She was at least, I'm not sure how long, 20-year member, I'm not sure how many years it was, at Chabad of Skokie. And that's where we have some of our best memories of Harriet. I guess my favorite memory of Harriet, I'll just say, I said the same thing at Dr. Lavenda's funeral, because to me it was such a warm, cozy memory. I took my little daughter, Liba, who then was maybe 1 or 2 years old, on Erev Shabbos for a quick visit. Maybe we brought a challah. I'm not sure what we were doing. I remember we were outside their house in Skokie. We got to go to Erev Shabbos. But the two of them were just talking with us, and I couldn't leave. Like, how do you leave Bubby and Zadie when they want to talk to you? But like it's going to be Shabbos. Somehow we managed to get out of there in time for Shabbos. But I remember that very warm feeling, standing like on the stoop or like on the lawn in front of that house, and just, you can't leave. Actually, we didn't want to leave. We also couldn't leave, but we had to leave. And that whole thing was a very good memory for me. And so I think that, to me, is my icon in my head for Harriet's personality, because Harriet was one of those people, I can't really explain it, but when I would talk to her, or talk with her rather, so something about her, how she would talk to me and how she would respond to what I was saying would make me feel like I could say whatever I want. I could say jokes, I could be silly, I could say serious things, whatever, and she always would respond very well to whatever I was saying, and I feel like in certain ways, Harriet was special in that she was able to bring out the best in people. And if you know her, I think you know what I mean. Great conversationalist, great at building relationships, you really feel close. I last saw her, I can't remember which day it was last week, and she asked me about my kids, even though she was obviously at a very, she's old and it's hard to remember all these people. She remembered my kids and she asked me about them. And so Harriet was somebody who brought people together. And I think that today more than ever, that's an important thing to be, to bring people together. I guess I'll just mention one more thing, which is one of the last things she said, if not the last thing she said, was that she asked Steve, where are the kids? Where are the kids? And I think that encapsulates Harriet. Where are the kids? Where are the people? Where are the people who are important to me? I want them to be around me. And that's how she was her whole life. That's how she was through to the end of her life. That is how she will be in the next life, looking down from Shemayim and saying, where are the kids? And she'll look where each kid is. And I'll say it includes kids who are biological, and it includes kids who are not biological. She'll say, where are the kids? And she'll keep an eye on each and every one of us and be a gutta better. At this point, we're going to hear from the kids. So first Stuart, then Elaine, and then David, and then we'll ask Rabbi Allen from Park Plaza, who is very close with Harriet as well, to share a few words.
First, want to acknowledge the close family members not able to be here with us today. My brothers Bernie and Ronald, and my Aunt Selma, my mom's sister. Rabbi Posner mentioned Mom grew up in the Bronx, and she told me that she used to like to roller skate and go to the swimming pool in the park during the summer. She attended the afternoon Yiddish school from age 10 through high school until they moved to Hartford. And there's a lot more to say about my mom's 97 plus years, but I wanted to highlight this part of her life as a way of saying that throughout her life, she was young at heart and liked being active and social. And just a few small examples, she continued to travel to Israel until she was 90. She was active in different organizations, such as Hadassah, Mizrahi, and the women's group, such as Sisterhood of the Synagogues that we belong to. For many of the 10 years that Mom lived at Park Plaza, she participated in everything, and at one point, she was known as the mayor of Park Plaza for her personal connections to many of the residents and staff. But family was a very important part of her life. Her Hebrew name was Chava, and as the Torah tells us in Parshas Bereshis, Vayikra Hadam Shem Ishto Chava Ki Hayasa Eim Kol Chai. Adam called his wife's name Eve because she had become the mother of all the living. And as Rashi comments, the Hebrew word Chava means the same as Chaya, life. Thus, Chava's name indicates she is the mother of all the living. Our mother, Chaya, gave birth to 5 children and is the mother, the one who gave birth to the rest of the family that followed, all of the children, the grandchildren, and great-grandchildren. She knew them all and faithfully remembered to send birthday cards and holiday gifts. But she was also the spiritual mother and inspiration of our family. It is said of our matriarch Rivka, when she married Yitzchak, she instilled a spirituality into their home that was apparent in the lamp, the light that was burnt in the tent, in the dough that was blessed, and in the cloud signifying the divine presence. So too our mom, Chaya Rivka, instilled the spirituality into our home. In particular, as Rabbi Posner mentioned, during the years when we were growing up, she, together with my father, Nathan of blessed memory, made sure that we knew that we were Jewish and what it meant to have a Jewish home, even in places like North Adams, Massachusetts, or Oshkosh, Wisconsin, with very small Jewish communities. And we lived in Oshkosh. She drove an hour each way twice a week so we could attend classes at the afternoon Hebrew school, the conservative synagogue in Appleton. We went every Shabbos morning to that conservative synagogue. Wanted to make sure that we had that experience every Shabbos, davening in a shul. True Mesiras Nefesh. We had a kosher home and traditional Friday night dinners with kiddush and challahs, even if we as kids and teenagers had other plans after the meal. I didn't understand so well then what it took for us to have this Jewish exposure and experience. But I certainly appreciate it now and say thank you. Toda Rabba, thank you, Mom, for beginning and maintaining our spiritual inspiration until we came to it on our own. My mom was always smiling, which was part of her positive outlook on life and on people. And I want to share two stories that illustrate this about Mom. My daughter-in-law, Ilana, about 10 years ago when Mom was visiting in Israel, my daughter-in-law Ilana asked her, "What is the success? What is your secret, Mom?" Or Bubby, they call her Bubby. What is your secret to being happy in life and having a long, successful marriage? And she said the answer to that question is to be able to give in to your spouse and to be accommodating to others. It's not easy, she continued, but when you can think of the other person and make them happy, then ultimately you also will be happy. The second story is actually an example of how my mother was careful in thinking about another person. When I came home from Israel after spending my junior year of college learning at BMT in Yerushalayim, I brought a Shabbos candelabra for my mother as a present. That was in 1975, and she used it for 35 to 40 years. It was not a traditional-looking candelabra. It was modern-looking. Okay, I'll tell the truth. It was probably ugly. But she used it without commenting every Shabbos. She used it or saying a word to me about what she thought of it. Only 35 to 40 years later, I guess she thought it was time to tell the truth. So one time when we were visiting her from Cincinnati, she told me that the candelabra was not to her taste. I don't remember her exact words, but something to that effect, and she had decided not to use it anymore. But she had used it all those years because she had not wanted to hurt my feelings. She was thinking of me. What a powerful life lesson for all of us on how we should act towards others. With that in mind, I ask Mechila forgiveness, Mom, for anything that I may have done against you or said to you. We have started celebrating the holiday of Hanukkah, the holiday of lights. The holiday when those burning candles remind us of our constant struggle, but success in maintaining the continuity of Judaism and the Jewish people. With our mom, grandma, great-grandma, Bubby, sister, aunt, cousin, friend laying before us, Chaya Rivka Bas Yaakov Aron, we feel the darkness and the pain of her loss in our lives, but we remind ourselves that we are celebrating Hanukkah, and the spiritual lights that she has kindled in her lifetime are being continued in the family members and the Jewish lives that they are living. There is much light pushing away the darkness. May her soul be bound in the bond of life. Amen.
Okay. I just want to say, this can be a little bit short. My mother was a very special lady, and I've learned a tremendous amount from her. I just want to focus on one point, and hopefully I can get through it without totally breaking down here. I just want to say we had a very close relationship, and my mother and I spoke often. You know, we talk about the kids, the grandkids, what she was doing. We talked about books. We a lot of times read, or some of the time read the same book, and then sometimes we would just laugh, and it was really something that we just both like lose it and start laughing, and it was really very special. We live in Rhode Island, so we didn't get to see my parents all that often, and that was in the days before video calls and all of that kind of thing. But somehow she built a relationship with each one of the kids, and even when they would come to Providence, people in Providence remember her very fondly. She had this special ability to connect with people, and I think that's been said already, but I think it's worth saying it again. Everyone in her circle knew that they had some special piece in her heart, that just belonged to them, and everyone felt like their relationship with her was very special, and it was. She listened. She was a really good listener, but even more than that, she would connect. She would find some kind of something to talk about or something to ask about that would bring people to share with her and just seriously build a connection. I miss her. I miss our talks. We hadn't been able to do as much of that in the last year and a half or so. I miss her wisdom. And I feel very fortunate. To have had her as my mother, and the tremendous bracha to have had her in my life for so long. She got to meet all of our kids, see most of them get married, see grandchildren, our grandchildren, her great grandchildren, and I think something that we can take forward and learn from her is just this ability to connect and to make people feel special is something that I think would make all of us, help us all grow as people and as family members and as community members, and in general, just make us all help us grow. And I also want to wish to ask Mechila for anything I did or didn't do, if I wasn't as attentive as I could have been. I didn't see her as often as she would have liked. Just hope that she has forgiveness and that this next stage in her journey goes easily, and her neshama has a major aliyah, and he's Zichra Baruch.
So I want to second what Elaine said about Mom's impact on people, so sharing some of the thoughts that from her descendants. So Mom, Grandma, Bubby, she had the privilege of knowing her grandchildren, great-grandchildren, as they did in knowing her. There was always excitement when Bubby came to visit and often to participate in the simcha. And even though travel wasn't easy and it became more difficult over time, not to mention the time she broke her ankle and had to endure a several-hour journey to the hospital and flying back to Chicago. But she took it in her typical good stride. And as it became more difficult to travel, so the pilgrimage to Park Plaza became more frequent, even in the winter, which wasn't easy. And these visits had an impact on all of us, and especially the children. So when my kids heard that Bubby passed, they were eager to share what she meant to them. So I'm going to share just a few thoughts that they sent. So Liam, aged 11, says, I remember when we visited you in Chicago about 2.5 years ago. I was 9.5, and I had silly ideas, but you always went along with them. Now I realize how silly they were, but it was my way of connecting with you and sharing something that mattered. I especially remember the trucker cap that I liked wearing, and I put it on your head, and you agreed to wear it and didn't take it off, even though it probably looked funny. And now I understand that what mattered wasn't the hat, it was that you were willing to join my world and make me feel close to you, and I'll always remember you for that. Eli, age 8, says, I remember Bubby as being very nice and kind. We went out to a restaurant, and she always let us order what we wanted. She wanted us to be happy and always make us feel special. My daughter Danit says, I want to share a memory from my childhood. When we came to visit you in Chicago, you always made sure we had special treats, fruit roll-ups, brightly colored cereal, things that didn't exist for us in Israel at the time. And you hid them, you even hid them from Grandpa, knowing he wouldn't approve. I still remember so clearly eating the roll-ups behind the door in the dining room so Grandpa wouldn't see us. To us, it felt thrilling and magical. It made us feel spoiled, understood, and completely loved. And throughout the years, you always showed a genuine interest in what I was doing. You always somehow had the right thing to say, especially when I was having a hard time. With struggling through challenging moments, you're always understanding, supportive, and encouraging. You reminded me how proud you were of me and how proud Grandpa would have been too. Your words gave me strength, and your belief in me stayed with me for more than you'll probably know. And from my daughter, Doreen wrote, we visited her 3 years ago, and what Yali, that's her great-granddaughter, remembers is how happy Grandma was that we came to visit her and how kind she was to us. She gave us stickers to play with, and we shared a lovely Shabbat dinner at her place. Liav, the younger boy, was too young to remember, but I have a picture from that visit where Grandma let him hop on her walker and pushed him around the Park Plaza. It was such a sweet moment that says everything about who she was. My memories of Grandma are like something out of a movie. She was the kind of... She was the kind of grandmother who baked cookies, took you to the library and truly listened no matter what you had to say. Whatever I shared with her, she always made it sound like the most interesting thing in the world. She was endlessly positive and helped me see good in life. My 2 top memories of her was how when we came to visit, she would buy bubbles and small fun prizes and keep them on the porch. She would take us to the library and let us choose books and movies to take home. It was always pure joy. She played with us, always let us win, and created an atmosphere that was warm, pleasant, and full of love. The second memory I always treasure is when my parents and Grandma met my boyfriend, Davidi, who's now my husband, for the first time. It was the first time I introduced him to the family, and Grandma was there too. The next morning, she came to me and said something like, he's such a nice fellow. And that simple sentence meant so much to me and made my heart feel at ease. I'd also proudly tell people that my grandma was over 90 and that we spoke on WhatsApp video calls. That connection was so special and allowed us to maintain a relationship despite living far away. I hope one day to give my grandchildren the same feeling she gave me. To have the same patience, warmth, and love that Grandma had. Love you and miss you, Grandma.
I want to take a moment to pause and just recognize all the people that came out here on such a cold day in the middle of a very festive time of Hanukkah, and how it really means so much to all those who knew and loved Harriet. It means so much to the family. We are in the midst of Hanukkah, And so we refrain from drawn out, deep, sad hespedim, words to reflect and inspire. If we take a moment to dwell on Hanukkah, Hanukkah is truly a time, as our rabbis teach us, lahodos ulahalel, to give thanks and praise to Hashem for all the miracles, the protection, and the wonders in our lives that He has given us, and particularly the holiday of Hanukkah. And in that vein, although those who knew her and loved her best, and of course her dear family, there's a sense of grief and a sense of loss, there's also a sense of hodah and a sense of deep thankfulness and gratitude for having had in our lives the wonderful person of Harriet, of Chaya Rivka, who was such a tremendous person who we knew and loved, and the family is deeply grateful. So there will be a continuum of beginning that grief, and that grief will move to great gratitude. And as I mentioned to the family this morning, I really feel like, going forward, we'll always associate Hanukkah with Harriet. And again, that grief will come to deep gratitude and will be part of the Hodah, the Hallel, the praise and the thanks. As you've heard from so many, Harriet was a deeply wonderful person. She was a lady of integrity, tremendous positivity, tremendous ability to see the good in life, tremendous ability to see the good in people, to look at another human being and see goodness within them. She cared about people, and she cared that their lives would be good and that they would have good. I spoke to her last week. I visited her last week, and she was, as everyone said, tremendously positive. I wasn't particularly worried. I knew she was failing. I knew things were getting rough. I knew her treatments were changing. But I saw the same Harriet that I was used to seeing, the same wonderful smile, the same inquisitive mind, the same person asking about friends and family. How are her friends at Park Plaza? How is my family doing? How was I doing? How could she help? How could she talk? And that's who she was. She was a person that others wanted to be around. She was a person that made others feel good. She was a person that brought simcha and goodness to this world and life, and that she leaves us that legacy to continue to bring simcha to others, to bring happiness and goodness to others, and to lift up each other in our own lives. As we've heard, she was born in the Bronx, and as somebody who was born to a mother from the Bronx, I can tell you that people raised in the Bronx are good people. And she was one of those people. She moved to Hartford, and as somebody who spent most of his childhood in Connecticut, I can tell you that people from Connecticut are wonderful people, and there's much goodness there. She always kept her Yiddishkeit and her Judaism forefront in her mind. She had a love for the people of Israel and a love for our traditions and our practices, and she was a wonderful Jewish person. As we've heard, even in far-flung communities, North Adams, Massachusetts, Oshkosh, Wisconsin, she kept the flame of Yiddishkeit burning. And as we know from Hanukkah, one light dispels much darkness. And she kept that candle, or maybe that torch at times, burning brightly. That one jar of oil that cannot be extinguished, that cannot go out in all the raginess of the fires. She was that strong candle. I heard once from Rabbi Mervis, the chief rabbi of England, that he said there are three things that we push back on against in Hanukkah. There are three things that are ways we triumph over in Hanukkah, three A's. And they are, of course, anti-Semitism, which we've all reeling from the events in Australia, and we know that there is hatred out there, but we push back in Hanukkah with love and courage and emunah and faith, and Harriet did that. She conquered hate with her goodness and her kindness and her love for people. There is assimilation, which we know is very difficult around this country. So many people cannot say they have raised the wonderful family that she raised. To look around this room, to know her amazing family, so many children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, Kanai Nahara, Kain Yirbu, may they grow and increase. And you could clearly say someone who was in Oshkosh or somebody who was in North Adams, maybe they wouldn't raise a Jewish family, maybe their family would be assimilated. And if you know the amazing Lavenda family, you know that she triumphed over assimilation. And the last of the A's, anti-Semitism, assimilation, and lastly, apathy. And Harriet was not apathetic. Harriet had great conviction. Harriet believed. She had a love of Yiddishkeit. She had a love of her values. As was mentioned, when we would run programs in Park Plaza, she would often be the first one there without exception. I knew that I was on time if I got there and Harriet was there. And if Harriet was not there, something was amiss or I was early, because she was always on time. And she would miss nothing, be it music, be it a shir, be it a class, be it a rally, a Torah, Tehillim. She was at everything. She was a constant. She was a cheerleader, and as people said, she was even the mayor of Park Plaza. She was amazing. She overcame and overcame and overcame. I remember even during COVID, when we were all shuttered in our apartments, in our houses, we couldn't go out, we couldn't even run public programs at Park Plaza, I would get on the Zoom, which I had trouble figuring out, and she was already on the Zoom. And she was on the Zoom waiting for the class, waiting for teaching, waiting to hear Torah. When we were able to be in shul, every Shabbos without fail, she was in the front row. I knew I couldn't slip up during davening because Harriet would see what was going on. Now, mind you, Harriet would never call me on it. That wasn't her way. But she would notice. She sat in the front row of the shul with her two good friends, Nettie Myers of blessed memory and Helen Berger of blessed memory. She would sit with Helen and Nettie in the front row, sometimes with her oxygen on, sometimes without, and she would daven. I don't know how much of the Hebrew she was able to read and how much she knew, but she was connecting with Hashem. And her wonderful family is the proof and the evidence. There's so much to say, but I want to just leave you with the imagery of the famous Gemara in Tainus that tells us of the weary traveler who reaches the oasis, who comes to the lush and beautiful tree and eats from the fruit and drinks from the stream and wants to give the tree a bracha, wants to give the tree a blessing, and says, there's nothing I can bless you with, O wonderful tree. You have luscious fruit, you have beautiful shade, you have precious water running next to you. The only thing I can bless you, O tree, with is that all the trees that come from you will be as beautiful and as wonderful as you. And reflecting and celebrating this great woman of 97 years, we say to Harriet, there's nothing we can give you except to bless you that all the wonderful people, the children, the grandchildren, the great-grandchildren, may they increase, that come from you, be as wonderful and as special and as amazing as you. Yehi Zichra Baruch. May her memory be blessed.
Harriet will be missed by her family, her friends, her children, Dr. Bernard and Fanny Lavenda, Dr. Ronald and Linda Lavenda. And we paused for a moment just to recognize Linda, who went above and beyond in taking care of Harriet and helping her, moving her out of the house, and so on and so forth. I think it's very special. It's not always so easy to get along with your mother-in-law. Now, not a problem for me. It's not a problem for Linda either, obviously. Iris and Stephen Shapiro, Rabbi Stuart and Karen Lavenda, Steve and Linda Lavenda, Elaine and Martin Saklad, David and Nitzy Lavenda, grandmother and great-grandmother to many. Also want to mention Harriet's caregiver. Her name is Inkashi, and she did a really special job with Harriet. And all the staff at Park Plaza and at Dobson, and Rabbi Allen is here, I think it's very important to mention. And all of us here, we're all going to miss her, and we're all going to go in her way. May her memory be a blessing. Tehei Zichra Baruch.
This concludes the funeral here at the chapel. The interment will take place at Shalom Memorial Park. For those who will be going out to the cemetery, we'll be lining up in our parking lot. We ask that you have your headlights and hazard lights on while driving your procession. We're placing a magnetic flag on top of your vehicle and drive as close as safety permits to the vehicle in front of you. Shiva is going to be the Lavender residence, 2715 West Morse. Chakras every morning at 7 o'clock and Sunday at 8 o'clock. And then Mincha Marv will be at 4 p.m. Your times for Minyanim and Shiva times are on the service folder that you received when you arrived or on the website that you joined the live stream with. If we can have Yoel, Martin, and Yankee come forward and act as pallbearers, or if we could have everybody else please rise as we escort the chapel, the casket from the chapel.